we talk about the kind of constant cycle of picks, and I think the valuation of picks around it feels like it's been talked to death of, they're at their most valuable around the combine leading up to the draft, and then in season they drop and things like that. How do you approach future picks? Do you look at projecting them? Do you particularly try to target future picks at a certain time in the cycle, or how does that work for you?
I think every league has its own context, and this is part of circling back to the opening of this show, where you understanding the tendencies of your league matters, because every league, you talked about having their own, microeconomy. They also have their own calendars as to when things escalate, when things slow down. Taking advantage of those windows is an important part of the strategy. And I also think that draft classes matter. I think paying attention, that's why there's value in understanding or following or interacting with certain Devi content creators, because I think there's value in understanding what's coming down the pipeline as far as positional values, because I think that can impact your strategy, right? If you know that the 2025 class, now granted, they always change, right? A weak class will gain one or two players that get momentum, and it'll kind of change the narrative. But for the most part, you have a pretty good idea. We knew a year ago that this wide receiver class was going to be strong in this most recent draft class. And the running back class was going to be weak. Sure, we talked ourselves into some of these second and third round running backs, but ultimately, if you really break it down, it's a relatively weak class when it comes to running back. We're just kind of hyping things up because, we enjoy adding value to draft picks. It's what we do as a community. So knowing the value of the draft class that's coming in a 2 to 3 year window is important, because it can change your strategy. And I also think that league activity matters. And I'll probably repeat that 5 more times before the show's done. Because if you are in a league where there's minimal activity, where not a lot of trades get completed, it changes the value of the depth on your roster. It changes the value of your draft picks that are already in your possession. But if you're in an active league where you can move in and out and trades are done all the time and rookie picks carry a ton of value, then you can move in and out and you can make deals, and you're not locked into a particular roster or a particular value. And so that changes, again, your strategy, your perspective, and just what you're able to accomplish in different parts, different windows that gain activity.
Yeah, and I love the idea that draft picks are liquidity, in terms of you will enable you to move around, and future assets will generally kind of grow in value as that class approaches. I think, building off your point around looking at future classes, one thing I keep saying is that I strongly believe the easiest way to project future classes for Dynasty is to just look at the quarterback position, because quarterbacks create depth in the
Mm-hmm.
first round, particularly. And you look at classes in recent history where we've had bad first round drafts for Dynasty, it's largely when there's no quarterbacks. You look at the Kenny Pickett draft where there was only one first round pick quarterback position. It means that 11 position players are going to be first round picks. Now, generally, we have a same volume of kind of good prospects, elite prospects, that kind of thing. If you've got 4 or 5 elite prospects at the wide receiver or running back position, if you're adding in 5 quarterbacks, suddenly those back end of the first round picks you're going to get an elite asset. Whereas if you suddenly only got one quarterback, that value of a late round pick is greatly reduced, because you don't have the depth in the quarterback position. So looking forward to the 2025 class, I'm happy. I've yet to dive in. I'll dive in January and go full tilt. But from what I'm reading and hearing from the kind of Devi voices that I hear, it's looking like a weak quarterback class, and that has got me concerned for those mid to late round first round picks for 2025, because I'm thinking this is probably going to be a shallow draft class for Dynasty. So my 2025 picks are not going to be as valuable as I probably think they're going to be now. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting path of kind of tread that. When you're valuing rookie picks, and particularly, I guess we're talking about future picks here, does the valuation affect whether you're a contender or a rebuilder, or does that pick? And I'm not talking about projections of this is going to be an early first or a late first, but let's just say a random 2025 first. Does that hold the same value to you if you're a contender or a rebuild, or do you find that depending on your roster situation where you see yourself as a contender, it affects that valuation at all?
I think it's a perfect storm. I think there's synergy between, everything we've talked about, whether or not the draft class is upcoming is solid, with how much league activity you have. And I'm far less worried about making them. So I say making a mistake. You don't swing and miss. It's not truly a failure unless you just kind of wallow in it, unless you allow it to become a failure, right? So if you're in a league that's active and you swing and miss, well, you can still make up for that. You make another deal, you come back and you come at it from a different perspective. But if you're in a league that doesn't make trades, it changes the net worth of every asset you have, whether it's currently rostered players or whether it's draft picks you currently own or are projected to get. So contender versus rebuild to me is again, the labels don't carry anywhere near as the same amount of weight in an active league as opposed to a league with minimal trades. And then the other thing is, what's the league breakdown? Do I have 6 other managers who are rebuilding? Do I have 8 other managers who are all pretty much contenders and there's 4 bottom dwellers? And so that league makeup and looking at and evaluating your opposition's rosters makes a difference as to what are you doing, whether you're rebuilding or whether you're contending. That comes into part of the equation.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw a question at you now. I'm conscious that I didn't tell you this was coming, so feel free to bat it back to me if if you don't disagree. Does your, I guess, appetite for risk, and I lead into the Daryl Morey quote when he was a GM at the Houston, oh my God, Rockets, where he talked about as a contender, your appetite for risk has to go up. In Dynasty, for me, it's the complete opposite, where if I'm in a rebuild situation where I'm not a contender, I'm embracing as much risk as possible because the potential for boom bust could spin me out of that rebuild quicker. If it busts, it doesn't cost me. But as a contender, I'm looking to reduce my risk as much as possible. Do you view and approach risk in a similar way, or do you tolerate risk the exact same, whether you're pushing for a title or looking to kind of acquire as many draft picks as possible?
So risk over the course of my fantasy football career, risk really hasn't been too much of a deterrent for me. But I agree with you. I think what your team roster is and what your expectations are for a given season matter, right? So the last thing you want to do is take a huge swing when you feel you're a top 2 team in a league, and the next thing you know, you find yourself, 0-7 to start the season because you just completely gaffed. So I think that does matter to a degree, but overall risk, I think risk is built in, right? It just really comes down to fantasy football is supposed to be fun. Some people are just naturally risk averse to begin with. And so some digesting risk on a regular basis to them kind of takes the fun out of just the hobby. Other folks enjoy risk, right? There's the reason people gamble is because there's risk involved. There's money to be made. And so, if that's part of the adrenaline rush, then definitely go ahead. But I do agree with you to a degree. It matters what my expectations are, and it matters how many people I'm competing against. If I'm a contender and I've got 2 other teams in this league that I think are potential contenders, I'm going to pretty much hunker down and really focus on depth to maintain that level of success. If I'm in a league and 7 teams are contending and it's really kind of hit or miss based on the overall health of your roster, I'd be much more apt to take risk then because I need something to differentiate myself from the rest of those other 6 contenders in the league.